Hi there everybody, hope you're doing well. Just a quick video today. I thought I'd go over the IELTS speaking test format for any of you who are not familiar with what happens during the speaking test. So I'll give you sort of the main parts of the speaking test. I'll explain those. And then I'll sort of give some input from my perspective as an ex-examiner, sort of what is expected and what sort of happens during each stage. Okay, and I hope it's useful and informative, and I hope everybody's well. It's a beautiful day here in South Korea. Sun is shining, nice and cool. We've got a very nice autumn day. Okay, let's get started. We'll start with part one. Okay. So just to remind you that the test is 13 or 14 minutes long, depending on the candidate, maybe depending on the examiner. Part one is 4 to 5 minutes. Now, as an examiner, we are encouraged to make the time as long as possible. All right, so you may find that your examiner makes you go on for the full 5 minutes as opposed to 4 minutes. And the reason for this is that we want to hear as much language as possible from each candidate in order to give an accurate score. Okay, the more we hear the candidate speak, the better we can assess their language. So in the first section, part one, the examiner would introduce themselves, and then they ask you to introduce yourself. There's some preliminary things such as checking identification, and basic things like that also occur before the actual test begins. When the test begins, the first questions tend to be about general and familiar topics. Okay, so we're talking about things like housing. That's a common one. Accommodation. Okay, where do you live? Tell me about the place where you live. Tell me about your accommodation. Tell me about your hometown. Tell me about your job. Do you enjoy your job? Are you studying or are you working? That's often a lead-in question, and then it develops from there, depending on your answer. So I'm getting some emails as we speak. It may also be about your hobbies, interests, things like that. So the key here is this word, I think, general. Okay, general questions. They are not specific. They're not difficult to understand. They're very basic things about your life, day-to-day life, hobbies, interests, where you live. The sort of questions that you would ask somebody when you first meet them, maybe. Okay, to get to know somebody a bit better. So that's part one of the test, the introduction and initial interview, and that's around 5 minutes. Okay. Then, and this is, I would say, undoubtedly the easiest part of the test. If you're not aware, it might not be news to some of you, but the speaking test is constructed so that it gets more difficult as you go through. Okay, so the first part one, is easy, and most people find it quite easy, okay, or manageable. Part two, a lot of people are scared because, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then part three, you have more abstract things, okay, more complicated concepts and topics. That is designed to really get to the bottom of your language ability. How good are you really? Okay, you might be able to talk about your house, your hobbies, and your job quite well. That's basic stuff. But how good are you talking about complex or abstract things that perhaps you've never considered before or you've never practiced before? Okay, can you use your language, the language you have, can you manipulate it? Can you use it to talk about things that are unknown to you, or you haven't practiced before? That's the reason for part 3. Okay, then we get to part 2, the dreaded long turn. And the long turn, okay, what does it involve? It involves speaking for 2 minutes. Okay, it says 1 to 2 minutes. The examiner might say, okay, here's a topic. You have to talk for 1 to 2 minutes. It will be as close to 2 minutes as possible. From my point of view, as an examiner, I try to extend as long as possible to get as much of a sample of your speaking as possible. Okay, so just expect it to be 2 minutes. And I think that you should practice with this in mind. Practice speaking for 2 minutes. Don't practice speaking for 1. It's not enough. Okay? If you want a good score, you need to be able to keep going for 2 minutes at least. So, after the first part, you talk about a particular topic. So this is when it starts getting more specific. The examiner will give you a topic card, okay? That will include some points that you can cover in your answer, so you can mention these things, sort of bullet points that you should talk about. They will give you 1 minute, only a minute to prepare. You can write notes with a pencil and paper. They will give you these things to write your notes, okay? Or if you're doing it online now, the electronic sort of distance IELTS, then you'll be able to make your own notes. Okay, so you have 1 minute to prepare, and then the examiner says, okay, thank you, time's up. Please start speaking now. This is where it gets difficult. This is where you have to start talking for a long time, a long turn. We'll make some more videos later that cover tactics, strategies for this, but just prepare for the whole 2 minutes. 1 to 2 minutes, ignore 2 minutes. When you're planning, when you're preparing, when you're getting ready, 2 minutes, okay? At the end of the 2 minutes, the examiner will say, stop, thank you very much. That's 2 minutes up. And he or she will ask you a couple of what they call rounding off questions, okay? That means that it's a sort of transition from part 2 to part 3. Okay, so it kind of leads from one part to the other. It finishes off the long turn section in that way. Okay, so after you've done that, you might think, oh, I wish it was over, my God. But it's not. It gets worse. We move on to the two-way discussion in part 3. And this is around 5 minutes. So part 1, 5 minutes. Part 2, 4 minutes. And then back to 5 minutes again for here. And the point of this is to develop the topic from part 2. So the examiner asks further questions which are connected to the topic from part 2. Okay, so the discussion will sort of open up from your thing that you talked about, your opinion, your story, your experience. The examiner will open it up. Okay, open up the topic to general questions about that topic. Okay. However, the key, which it doesn't mention here, is that the concepts are often abstract. Okay, what do I mean by abstract? I mean things that are not sort of obvious and concrete. Okay. There are things that you have to think quite deeply about. I'm not going to say they're philosophical, or in some cases they are somewhat, but they are not obvious things like, you know, what's your name? Tell me about your house. How many bedrooms do you have in your house? What job do you do? What's your hobby? That's not abstract. Okay, abstract might be talking about the economy. It might be talking about the environment. It might be talking about, human sort of interaction or whatever it might be. Okay, so something sort of higher level thinking, higher level logic, and again, maybe something that you've never thought about in your life before. And that's why it's really important when you're preparing for IELTS to do as much reading as you can. I want you to be informed. I want you to be intelligent. I want you to be well read, so that if you encounter something difficult in part 3, in fact, that counts for the reading or the listening test as well. Something about politics or something about the environment or something that, is not something that you sort of maybe have to deal with on a daily basis. You could be ready. You could be informed. You could know about that. You have an opinion. You have a stance. You can talk about that. And that's really important. Okay? So part 3 is the most difficult one because you have to talk about things which are kind of out there, right? Okay, it could be anything. And it's not really about you this time. Okay, in part 3, it's not really about you. Okay. Good. Okay, guys, so that's just a quick summary of the speaking test, the different parts, and so also some input from me, from my perspective as an ex-examiner, and what I sort of expect candidates to do. I hope it's been useful. Like I said, we'll do some more videos another time about strategies for tackling, different sections. Particularly the long term, and particularly section 3, part 3. But for now, we'll leave it there, guys. Go out and enjoy the sunshine, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, bye.